I woke up on Wednesday morning feeling invigorated. I made another egg burger before setting out for Rocky Cab. I stood eating it and sipping a Coke and looking out the kitchen window at the clouds moving over the city. Snow clouds. I had mixed feelings. We cabbies refer to snow as white gold. The radios in our taxis start hopping when snow starts falling because people hate to drive in the snow. I'm talking Colorado people. Don't ask me to explain that, although the influx of Californians during the past few years might. I myself hail from Wichita, Kansas, where the air is humid and the snow is wet. Denver has dry snow. I love science. I closed my crow's nest and climbed down the fire escape, and already tiny flakes were tickling my face. I fired up my heap and headed for Rocky Cab. I had to turn on the windshield wipers before I got halfway there. This is going to be one of those snows. I could sense it. By the time I got to the Rocky Cab, the flakes had become big enough to recognize two of a kind. I paid for my daily lease and picked up the key and trip sheet for 127 from Rollo, who was too busy to even eat donuts. When I got outside, the big flakes were coming down steadily. A night driver had just brought 127 in, so the cab was warmed up for me. That's always pleasant on a day like this. It added to my lethargy. I checked the oil and water and looked for new dents on the body, which you always have to do or you get blamed for it, like everything else in life. I drove to a 7-Eleven and gassed up and bought a Coke and Twinkie and headed for downtown Denver, listening to the radio, which was already jumping. I wanted to sit in front of a hotel for a while. I ate brunch, see if I might be able to score an airport run before diving into the gold fields. The line at the Brown Palace was short, so I barely had time to finish my Twinkie before a businessman came out wearing an overcoat and carrying a briefcase. DIA, I said to myself. I was feeling both lethargic and smug. The man climbed into the back seat and said, "The History Museum." That burst my lethargic balloon. The Denver Museum of Natural History is on the east side of City Park. It's a $6 fare at best, maybe $7 with the tip. But I didn't mind so much. Money is money, and this trip would thrust me into the gold fields. I knew I would be jumping bells after I dropped him off, and that's cabbie lingo for radio calls from headquarters. I pulled away from the hotel and circled around and got onto 17th Avenue and headed for Colorado Boulevard, which runs adjacent to City Park. I made small talk. The man said he was in charge of a new exhibit. It was being brought here from Taiwan, something to do with statues made of jade. I pretended to be interested, which I had been good at since I was in the first grade. After he got out of my cab, I paused in front of the museum and filled out my trip sheet while listening for bells on that side of town. I didn't hear anything I liked. This is part of the smugness and lethargy and general cocksureness of driving on a day and a half. The city is desperate for cabs. I could have made a bundle that morning working the grocery stores, but that would have entailed loading my trunk with white plastic bags while standing in the snow and helping my fares carry the bags into their houses. Need I say more? I drove out of the parking lot and made a right turn onto Colorado Boulevard and headed down towards 17th. And then reality came a-knocking. I tried to pull over into the center lane, but the steering wheel would not obey. I had hit black ice. It was hidden beneath a layer of snow. My wheels no longer connected to the asphalt. My lethargy abandoned ship. Adrenaline grabbed the tiller. 100 feet ahead of me in line stood a bunch of cars waiting for the red light at 17th. I was sliding right toward them. My driver's ed teacher began screaming at me. I tapped the brakes, and nothing happened. I kept sliding. I was 70 feet away from the rear end of a Ford station wagon. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a bus 50 feet behind me. He was slowing down. Time was slowing down. Everything was slowing down. But me. My heart was pounding. The front end of 127 drifted left. I turned to the steering wheel to the right, but it was mutiny. I tapped the brakes. Nothing. I was 50 feet away from the Ford. I tapped and steered, and the front began to drift right. I was 30 feet away from having my very first traffic accident of my cab driving career, and I knew it. I felt sorry for the driver in the Ford. It was a woman with big hair. She was about to be introduced to me the hard way. And then it happened. The red light ahead turned green and the cars in front of me started moving. I was 20 feet away from the Ford, but I stayed 20 feet away from the Ford. The Ford was now moving at the same speed I was sliding. Relativity had struck in. Volition and chaos were indistinguishable. I love physics. The traffic ahead of me was pulling away. My cab slid over the right side of the road and bounced against the curb. I let the wheels do the braking, rubbing against the curb. I looked in my mirror. The bus and its pals were stopped, waiting for the smashing climax of this action adventure. But I had let them down. My cab came to a grinding halt. I sat there gripping the wheel, the steering wheel, and listening to Gene Krupa on the aorta. My engine was dead. City Park was bathed in silence. I looked in the mirror at the swirls and sweeps of the tire tracks. The traffic light turned back to red. I reached down and grabbed the key and started the engine, put the shift into drive, and eased away from the curb. I crept to the intersection, then turned right and crept along the south side of City Park. It was a sign from God. I recognized it. He was telling me, get new tires. I turned off both the Rocky radio and the AM radio to avoid any distraction. And I took it slow on the way back to the motor cabbie lingo for headquarters. Black ice is one of the few things in life you can't argue with. That and nuns.